Hello everyone, Ember here, back with a new video, and honestly I've got some really exciting news to share with you guys. Basically, Paradox Pokemon cards were revealed at World Championships, along with the confirmation that Acepex will be returning to the TCG next year. So for those of you who weren't aware, basically the next set in the TCG is going to be called Paradox Rift. So it kind of stands to reason there was going to be some Paradox Pokemon in there, of course. Now, there was some speculation that maybe Pokemon weren't actually going to do anything with Paradox Pokemon. This was because there was actually two Paradox Pokemon in the first Scarlet and Violet set, those being Iron Treads and Great Tusk. But for those of you who play the games or know more about them, you will be aware that those Pokemon are actually Titan Pokemon. So they're kind of like boss battles within that game. And you could also encounter them pretty early on in the wild, long before, you encounter the rest of the Paradox Pokemon. So that's basically why they ended up saving these ones for the, future sets and for the latest mechanic. So what they've done with them basically is split them into their subcategories of ancient and future. So these labels are basically exactly like single strike and rapid strike. So it does stand to reason, as it's mentioned up here, that there will be certain abilities and trainers and attacks to enhance them, which is super cool, to be honest. It does mean that we'll probably see like an Area Zero stadium, not revealed here, of course, but a stadium like that will help out Paradox Pokemon. There will probably be some tool cards, some supporters, like the AI versions of the professors, I'd imagine. So should be super cool to see. But as for the new cards themselves, we have an ancient version of Jigglypuff called Screamtail, which does have the pretty cool attack, Roaring Scream. Actually, before I get going, I do want to mention this very quickly. All evolution Pokemon, despite being, evolved forms, they are still classed as basics for Paradox versions. So you'll notice that Ironmoth that we'll look at in a second here, that is, obviously based on Volcarona, but it is still a basic in the TCG. Just something worth bearing in mind and keeping in mind when we look at the new Pokemon. So Screamtail is a basic Psychic HP, 90 HP rather, but Psychic type. Has the attack Roaring Scream. It says this attack does 20 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon for each damage counter on this Pokemon. Don't apply weakness and resistance for benched Pokemon. So super cool attack, to be honest. We've seen kind of like things like this before in the past. It is pretty good with Gardevoir, of course. Like that's probably going to be the number one partner everyone's looking at Screamtail for. Aside from that, I don't think there's too much potential in this card, but it is nice to see. And maybe when Gardevoir EX loses some of its best cards come the next rotation, whenever that may be, then, Screamtail might have a chance to shine. And of course, we haven't seen all the other trainers and abilities that could enhance this card. Next up, though, is we've got what I perceive to be maybe the weakest Paradox Pokemon revealed so far. That's not saying it might not have time in the limelight to shine. But Iron Bundle over here has the ability Hyper Blow. It says once in your turn, if this Pokemon is on your bench, you may switch out your opponent's active Pokemon to their bench. Your opponent chooses the new active Pokemon, of course. But if you do, you get to actually discard Iron Bundle and all cards attached to it. So that's honestly a really nice additional effect. It just means your opponent can't snipe it, and it means it's not like clogging up bench space, which is really nice, honestly. So I do kind of like this ability. Unfortunately, not like choosing which Pokemon your opponent sends up is, of course, where this card gets a bit questionable. You'd much rather use Escape Rope in most situations, sadly. Or, of course, just boss's orders. But still, Iron Bundle could be cool at some point. The attack is nothing to write home about, but, the ability is at least pretty cool. Next up, though, we've got one of my personal favorites for Paradox Pokemon. That's going to be Iron Moth. So it is a basic, despite being, of course, based on Volcarona. 130 HP basic fire type with the ability Thermal Reactor. It says once in your turn, when this Pokemon moves from your bench to the active. So this has to be during your turn, not during checkup. So you do have to switch or pivot into this. It says when you move it from the bench to the active, you may move any amount of fire energy from your other Pokemon to it. And then the attack, Heat Ray, for 2 fire and a colorless does 120, and during your next turn, you can't use Heat Ray, assuming Iron Moth, of course, survives an attack. So the damage doesn't seem super great, but the ability is, of course, very strong. Could be a very nice single prizer in certain situations. Like maybe use Charizard EX to power, like Charizard EX itself up, maybe, or other attackers. Then, of course, you could just switch into Iron Moth. You could get Magma Base involved even as well. The 120 is, of course, pretty low for these standards, I'm assuming that if there are other, like, Paradox Pokemon EX, like the basics, are all going to be pretty competitive, then 120 does actually 2-hit KO most of them, which is pretty cool to see at least. So Heat Ray also actually can be modified now, think about it, by Skeledirge EX. And then, of course, that has decent synergy with Magma Basin. So, of course, the Skeledirge EX that was revealed yesterday can modify this damage by plus 60. So, honestly, I do think Iron Moth has some potential. It doesn't seem super broken on the surface, and maybe I'm kind of reaching here because it is such a cool Pokemon. But still, I think the ability is really strong, and the attack can be pretty useful. Also, the attack saying you can't use Heat Ray next turn means if you use one of the new technical machine cards that we reviewed the other day, you could use, a tool card with that provides an extra attack, I should say, after you've used Heat Ray, assuming it survives. They did also reveal some of the artworks. This artwork is genuinely insane. Can't wait to own one of these. But yeah, some amazing artwork there for a future version of Iron Moth. Next up, though, is we have Brute Bonnet. So, like a basic version of Amoonguss. 120 HP, Dark type. Has the ability Toxic Powder. It says, once in your turn, if this Pokemon has an Ancient Booster Energy Capsule attached, you may make both active Pokemon poisoned. So there's a lot going on here with the wording, but the fact that it's Ancient Booster Energy Capsule suggests that they are doing the Energy Booster Capsules, which were basically these tool cards that were attached or equipped, I guess, to all of the Paradox Pokemon in the main games. So they are doing that for a tool card. Despite being called Booster Energy, it is actually a tool card in the main game series, so I'd imagine they'll keep doing that. Also, the fact that it specifies Ancient Booster would also suggest it's going to be two different variants, Future and Ancient, which is pretty interesting to see as well. Maybe, Ancient will get a booster tool that increases HP or reduces retreat cost, maybe it boosts damage, and then Future will get something a bit different. So that's cool to bear in mind. As for the actual ability itself, making both active Pokemon poisoned can be a bit annoying unless you're going to pivot out, but it can have great synergy with stuff like the Claydol that we've just seen in Obsidian Flames, maybe even a Lowland Raticate if that's more your bag. But honestly, I think this ability is pretty strong, especially because of the basic, and of course, assuming you can get the capsule with stuff like Arven, then I definitely think Brute Bonnet will be a decent upgrade for those sorts of decks. And then the attack does 120, and during your next turn can attack. Nothing great, nothing too impressive there, but it is of course here for that ability. Then the alt art for Brute Bonnet is amazing. Seen similar artworks like this before with like Mad Party and stuff. Really like the artwork on there. Then we see two of the Pokemon that are kind of like the main flagship Pokemon for the sets that are going to make up Paradox Rift. So Roaring Moon over here, 230 HP, Ancient Dark type basic. Quite a bit of a mouthful there, but he's a basic and he is pretty bulky. 2 attacks, both of which are for 2 dark and a colorless, which is not something you see very often, 2 attacks that cost the exact same. But Frenzied Gouging, which is a pretty violent name for an attack actually, says knock out your opponent's active Pokemon. You just knock them out. So think of like Giratina V-Star's V-Star power that just says knock them out. This is an attack on a basic. You just knock them out. However, if you do this, then it does 200 damage to itself. And honestly, if you can get this going pretty quickly, like we do lose Dark Patch to the next rotation, of course, whenever that is. We do have the upcoming Energy Sticker card, which is admittedly a coin flip, but it is a way of accelerating energy. I'm assuming we'll see some sort of Paradox Pokemon or Trainer card that can accelerate energy to these guys. I'd be very, very surprised if we didn't. So it is kind of hard to evaluate some of these cards without knowing the full set list. But honestly, I think this card is super strong, and that's without even looking at the second attack, Calamity Storm, which does 100 damage, and you may discard a stay in play. If you do, this attack does 120 more. So 220 doesn't seem like a lot, but if these kind of Paradox Pokemon are going to be relevant in the format and in the future, then 220 really isn't the worst number to be hitting. It still gets stuff like Chien-Pao, and I'm assuming we will definitely be seeing an Area Zero Stadium at some point. So, it's good to see that you'll be able to at least have some synergy on that front as well. So, honestly, I think this card is super good. I think this will be definitely seeing a lot of play. The attack is a little bit annoying to power up, but aside from that, I definitely think this card has serious potential to be very competitive. Next up, though, is we have Iron Valiant, which is a future form. So 220 HP, basic psychic type, has the ability Tachyon Bits. It says once in your turn, when this Pokemon moves from your bench to the active, you may put 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. And then the attack, Laser Blade, 2 psychic inner colors, does 200 damage, and during your next turn, this Pokemon can't attack. So super, super strong ability. We've seen this kind of thing in the past before, and it's always seen play. Stuff like the Inteleon, admittedly that came up from Drizzile, but still a very, very strong Pokemon card and worth playing in that deck. There's also a Glaring Zigzagoon that people play just because you could loop the ability, and that was placed with 1 damage counter. This is placed 2 damage counters, and even though admittedly you won't be able to pivot more than 2 or 3 times realistically in a turn, even if you have a lot of switches, switching cards, and escape robes, I still think this ability is very, very strong. Naturally, I think its best inclusion, or like the best way to play it, is maybe as a tech card in a psychic deck. You pivot into it and then you switch out occasionally and then just place the 2 damage counters to fix maths. You could obviously play this as some kind of quad deck. We have seen a technical machine that allows you to accelerate energy from the discard pile. So there is actually a way you could power up your Iron Valiants with themselves and then go on to use Laser Blade. And the 200 damage it will eventually get there with multiple tachyon bits. Honestly, I think this card is super cool. Is it going to be broken? Potentially, is my honest answer, because of course we haven't seen the rest of the Rapid Strike. I keep wanting to say Rapid Strike, but the future and ancient support cards, we haven't seen all of them yet. I honestly think this card could be super good. But yeah, there's a lot more Paradox Pokemon that are yet to be revealed, of course. I'm assuming we'll see a couple more in this set. And because these are all basics, they might even focus more on evolution Pokemon from the latest generations as well. I mean, I think we're supposed to get Garchomp EX in this set as well. So honestly, a lot of really cool Pokemon cards in one set. Now, there is some new news as well, actually, was that it was revealed that A-Spec mechanic will be returning to the TCG next year. The mechanic was first reduced in Boundaries Crossed in 2012, so pretty old. A-Spec cards were powerful item cards and were limited to 1 per deck, and they'll probably work in a similar way. So if you did catch the video that was released on the World Championships livestream, the A-Spec was definitely a trainer card, which is cool to see. So unfortunately, they're not quite like Prisms. I personally would have preferred Prisms to be brought back over A-Specs. That's just because Prisms were kind of like A-Specs, but they extended to Pokemon, as well as, Special Energy and stuff, which I thought was more interesting. But either way, A-Specs, super cool to see them back, and I really like these. Will these ones specifically get reprints? Hard to say. I can imagine they will bring Computer Search back, though, and Dowsing Machine. Master Ball would also be a good time to bring that back, since it's rarely in the TCG, despite being how prevalent it is in the main games. But yeah, A-Specs coming back. Honestly, don't know how to feel about this. I think it could be really cool. On the one hand, hopefully they don't make one really good one and the other ones are trash and there's no point to playing them. Kind of like what they did with Radiance, really. But hopefully, they don't muck this up and they end up being pretty cool. Also, the inclusion of G-Booster here really brings up an interesting point, because when A-Specs were first made, items and tools were still classed as items. So it's hard to know if maybe they will do A-Specs just for items, or if they'll maybe do A-Specs for tools and items. It would be cool to see a tool card A-Spec in the TCG, of course, because you could find it with Arven and such. And, maybe it's a tool card that could give a new power to a Paradox Pokemon, for example. But that's just my thoughts and theories for that. But yeah, it's been Ember Power. Let me know what you think about the news down below. And yeah, do you think these cards are going to be competitive? And yeah, thank you for watching.